Fantastic. I think we can start. Welcome, everybody. It is a great joy to have all of you here. For those of you who know me, welcome back. And for those of you who are here for the first time, very, very big welcome. My name is Yuko Handa, and I'm the Executive Director at the Japan Society of Boston. Even before I start, the chat box is open, so let us know where you are joining us from. We love to hear where you're joining us from, so let us know via chat. Just say hi from wherever you are. We'd love to hear where you're joining us from. So we have a great program for tonight. As you know, there's being bilingual, and then there's being bicultural. There's being bicultural, and there's being able to switch codes. And obviously, we have a great guest speaker tonight who would help us understand what that all means. So before I spoil everything for you, I'd like to introduce you to Kerianne Panos. Kerianne is the founder of MCML Consulting Services. She is the international business and communication specialist working with global scientific and technical organizations, where she trained current and future leaders to effectively collaborate with their global counterparts, and coaches bilingual and bicultural personnel to leverage their communication skills for their career success. I know personally that Kerianne have absolutely helped numerous researchers, leaders, educational leaders manage bicultural and or multicultural situations. So before I spoil it, I think I am going to hand over the floor to Kerianne. Please send us your questions for Kerianne in chat. We have a pretty long period set aside for Q&A in the end. So without further ado, Kerianne.
All right. Hello, everyone. So we have people from multiple places across the states. So good evening, good afternoon. And then we even have some people joining us from Tokyo. So ohayo gozaimasu to our Tokyo group. And from anywhere around the world, it is a pleasure to be here today. And we are talking about something very close to my heart, which is code switching. Now, some people already use code switching and don't really realize it. Yuko and I were talking for 5 minutes before this started, and we're code switching all the time. We're saying, yeah, nanka ne, maybe we should do it with this way. Dakedo na, maybe another way is better. So we're always kind of switching back and forth. And it's a really amazing part of the human brain to be able to do that. And I also think it's an amazing gift that we can connect in these different ways with each other. So just a tiny bit about me. I grew up kind of as a heritage speaker of Italian. I grew up with Italian-speaking grandparents and was the kind of resident language kid in the group. And they would speak to me in Italian. I would answer in English, like many heritage speakers. Then I started learning French and Spanish and found that really easy. So I decided to figure out what was the hardest language I could try. And one of my high school teachers was like, Japanese. And I was like, okay. And then, because I'm just kind of crazy, I was like, I'm going to do Japanese and Korean together. And my professor was like, yeah, you can't do that. And I was like, watch me. And so I decided to do Korean and Japanese together. And then I passed all the tests for Japanese, and then I was like, okay, next challenge, Chinese. Okay. And then I did more Chinese. And then in my 30s, working with some clients, they were a lot from the Middle East, Persian Gulf area. And I knew they were talking about me in Arabic. So I was like, okay, I'm going to now learn Arabic because I want to know what you're saying about me. And so I picked up Arabic as well. So I love to be able to work and speak in different languages. And I think one of the biggest challenges between US English and Japanese is that the language itself, yes, there are a lot of challenges between them, but more importantly, the thought process and the value system behind the language is the real difficult part. And that's what I want to talk about today as clearly as I can. Okay. So the title of my talk today is, watashi wa bilingual desu. So how we sort of mix and match our languages. And we have some resources on my website. And I'm creating some bilingual resources on a YouTube channel for what I call the Learning Lab, which I will talk a little bit about more later. I want to go right into things. Okay. So I'm going to first talk about the what and the why of code switching. Okay. So code switching means to switch from one language to another, but it's not as easy as just flipping a switch. Okay, most people, when they think about speaking different languages, are really just focusing on the language usage, which is like, what words do I use, the syntax, what does the grammar look like, and also the voice techniques on a more kind of surface level of volume and accent. Okay, so that's what a lot of people think about. And that's where a lot of people, when they're adults, particularly learning a second language, that's where they stop. Okay, but as I was first living and studying in France and then living and studying in Japan, I was like, no, something's missing. There's something more here that I'm not connecting with people. There must be something different. So when I first started working in Japan full time, I became sort of an interpreter and a mediator. Now, I first started working in Aomori-ken. So for those who know Japan very well, Aomori-ken is really north in Japan, and it's known for having one of the hardest accents. And of course, I started working for the governor, our Aomori Chiji, Chiji-san, had a really strong accent, so strong that they had jimaku, subtitles for him when he was going to the national diet, the Kokagikai, in Tokyo. So that was a big challenge. But more than that, the way I was speaking Japanese, it just wasn't working for my coworkers and my colleagues. But I knew that my language, my words were right, but just something was missing. So as I started doing interpreting, I started to really go beneath the surface. And then I was like, the thought process is different. Something's different here. And I thought that was really kind of fascinating. And I was like, wait a minute. I'm making sentences different in Japanese, and I'm using my voice differently in Japanese. Like if I introduce myself in English, I'd be like, hi, I'm Kerianne. Okay. But in Japanese, if I went like, konnichiwa, watashi wa Kerianne desu, it doesn't work. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with my language. That's totally fine. But nobody would do that. And likewise, if I'm in Japanese and I went, konnichiwa, Kerianne desu. And in English, if I went, hello, my name is Kerianne, that would also be a little bit strange. Nothing's wrong with my English per se, but it just doesn't sound or look right. Yeah. So we're talking about making meaning here. Yeah. And that meaning is what's connect people, not the words, but really the meaning. And then if you go even deeper, you get to what the value system is. And for people, we have a couple of key value systems that I have a lot of material about this, and I won't go into it today. And I'm happy to share the files with anyone who wants it. So you don't have to take screenshots. I'll share the file with you. I'm happy to do so. So I found that underneath, if you go really deep down, you get these social dynamics. And this is like hierarchy. Yeah. What's my place? Where do I fit? And as I was kind of living and working in the US, I felt like, yeah, I can talk to anybody, really. So my teachers I can talk to on a first name basis. Someone's older, it doesn't really matter. Okay, but as soon as I went to Japan, so I don't remember any of my boss's names. Yeah, I just remember them as like kacho and bucho and jicho. I'm like nani nani, like in my hand it's like nani nani jicho. What was his name? He's the vice director of something. I can't remember anyone's name in Japanese, but I can remember their titles, which is really interesting to me. And I'll be like, what was his name? He was Fukusanji, nani nani Fukusanji, Osane Fukusanji. The name comes at the end for me in Japanese. But in English, the person's first name comes, guaranteed. So it's interesting that kind of that thought process comes from that different value. And the last one, which is the self-perception, it's called locus of control. It means, do I put myself at the center, where I would do that more in US English? Yeah, we're like, I think this and I think that, and this is my opinion, this is how I look at it. Or do I say, here's the situation? Or in Japanese, I would do like, nani nani san, donwarimasu ka? Where it'd be about the other person. Yeah. So these things, we don't even realize they're happening. And the reason is that value system, we learn it very, very young. So I'm going to ask a quick question and I want to see what people answer. Okay. So at what age can kids first understand these value systems? So hierarchy and that self. What age do you think they can start understanding this? In chat, just write some numbers in chat. We got 3, we got 5, we got 3. Okay, a couple more people. 6, 3, 2. No one's there yet. We got one person who says 1. Okay, and 2. So it's actually about 18 months, which means that before we actually can say full sentences as people, yeah, we know this. And there have been a lot of experiments in cognitive science and language acquisition on children. And my son has been a part of many of them at Harvard and BU. And about 18 months, children can recognize this, which means before we really have words, yeah, so this is a pre-verbal understanding. So it's so young and much younger than scientists originally thought that we don't even realize we're doing it because we don't have the words, which is really fascinating to me. So that value system is really, really rooted in our thought process, really, really rooted in how we communicate with people. Okay. All right. All right. So really kind of quickly. So our environment is really important, right? Because our environment when we're 1 and 2 and 3 can even impact that value system. And then if you're in a certain environment all the time, right, then that also influences it. So if you've gone to yochien, right, preschool in Japan, right, you are doing the same activities as other kids. You are writing the same drawings as other kids. You are singing the same songs as other kids. You're getting certain messages about the code. If you're at a preschool in the US, your teacher is asking, what did you draw? What song do you want to sing next? What book do you want to read? Right. And just from that very, very young level, yeah, we're starting to learn different codes. And I think that's what's really interesting. And now little kids like my son, he has one language with me. We do OPAL, one parent, one language, one language with my husband and a different language at school. And sometimes he code switches. So he, and most of the time now, because he's 3, he code switches with me. He'll switch over into English with me, and he'll switch into Italian with my husband. He also knows that I speak Spanish, so he also speaks Spanish with me, but never with my husband. So it's really interesting. So at 3, he already knows these things. Okay, so to break it down into an easier image, I would say that most people, okay, when we think about language and communicating, kind of look at the leaf level, okay? That's the word, the grammar, and the sound. And that's where a lot of people stop. But underneath that, think about the trunk and those branches, okay? When people see a beautiful tree, like in the spring with the leaves on it, they're like, oh, I love the trunk. It's beautiful. I love the branches. Nobody says that, right? Everybody looks at like the green leaves, yes, and the flowers. Okay, so it's human nature not to look at the trunk. It's human nature not to look at those branches. But that's the really important part of communication. That's really where the thought process and the voice, the pitch, the intonation, and the identity comes from. So the identity part of communication is in thought process. And underneath those roots that we can't see, that's that value system and the perception of self. Yeah, those roots are very critical, but we can't see them. We often forget them. But that's where a lot of the miscommunications and misunderstandings that I deal with in work, that's where they come from. So a lot of times at work, people tell me like, this person like really irritates me, but I don't know why. Like, why doesn't this person get it? Why does this person do it this way? I don't understand. Yeah. Whenever we don't understand, that's typically down at that value system. Because again, pre-verbal happened before we even had words. Okay. So when people come from similar backgrounds, it's like having similar trees. Okay. The language, the thought, and the value is more likely to match. So this gives the friend response. Okay, so I call it like teki versus tomo, teki tomo. Okay, so this is sort of the friend response of like, oh, we're similar. Oh, I can trust you. Okay, good, let's talk. And that helps build the trust. We've got similar language, therefore similar thought, therefore similar value. Okay, and that way it makes communication much easier. Now, what happens when we switch our languages? It's like you have different trees, okay, where we have the differences. So we have this kind of different language usage, therefore different language thought process, therefore different value system, and that leads to the foe response or the tiki, the enemy response. So what's really interesting about this process is when we have the friend response, okay, both people's brains start focusing on commonalities and they start to ignore differences. That's what's really interesting. So let's say I'm speaking Japanese to Yuko, okay, and I use very similar kind of language and thought and value to Yuko. Her brain goes, ooh, いいね. Ah, 安心する. Oh, I can trust this person. よかった. Now, Yuko will start to not see my differences. She will not notice as much that I have different face, different background. She will stop noticing the differences. And that's why code switching is so very important. Yeah. Because once we get the right code, we signal to the other person's brain that I am a friend. You can trust me. And then the other person's brain stops noticing differences and focuses on similarities. When we use different codes, the brain goes, oh no, yeah, teki kamo. Oh no, this person might be an enemy. I shouldn't trust them. And then the brain starts to look for differences. And then, so if Yuko's like, あ、こんにちは、Kerianne、どうもよろしくお願いします。It's like, Yuko-san, oh, 元気？何してんの？ Her brain is like, whoa. ちょっとなんか違う。Something's different. やっぱまあ外国人だし、なんか違う年齢だし、なんか違うなんかだしね。So the 違う different comes up in her mind. Yeah, and automatic, she starts seeing the differences. So that's why even if we speak the same language, if we don't code switch, we don't then trigger or facilitate that friend response. That's what the key point is here, is that once we're speaking the same code as the other person thinks we're a friend. Then we talk to each other and we build trust. That's great for relationships, and that's also great for business. So there's a very real practical bottom line here as well for those who work in business. Okay, so I have a lot more slides so that when we get into questions, I'm going to go over a little bit more in detail when they come up. What I'd really like to do is switch over to what I think is the most important part here, is the sort of the who and the how of code switching, especially for US English and Japanese. Now, I highlight US English because it's its own communication style. I'm going to very quickly show you why in this slide. Okay. Actually, this slide here. Okay, I'm going to go to this slide because we have different communication styles, so different codes that we use, but like that are underneath our language and the thought process system. And if you look here, okay, at our US English on the top left, all right, so you look at North America and then you look over at the middle right, you see Japan, okay, you see that in the US, you have the persuasive approach. That tends to be a much more important code. That persuasive approach says we are equal. There's no hierarchy here. And also, I'm speaking from an individual point of view. That's a key part of the value behind the language. Okay. When you then compare that with Japan on the right, you see descriptive as the most common code, which is the hierarchy. So everyone is unequal, yeah, but sort of stable in the situation. And it's not about me, the individual, it's about the group or it's about the situation, which means we have basically opposite values. And that's one of the most difficult things to overcome is that our brains are like, my American English brain is like, yeah, we're equal. Of course we are. My Japanese brain says, yeah, そんなことないです. That's not how this works, right? My ibasho, right? My place is here. Your place is here. So when I'm speaking to Yuko in English, we're both using English code. So I'm like, hey, Yuko, what's up? How's it going? If I speak to Yuko in Japanese, I'm like, Handa-san, konnichiwa, yoroshiku onegaishimasu. Because she's older than me, I think. Yeah. Okay. So she maybe even is a year or even a day older than me. And therefore, she's in a more senior position. And in English, I'm going to use a lot of like, I think about this and I think this is a good idea and I think this is great and I want to do this, which is completely fine. Now, if I said that in Japanese, there'd be so much watashi wa, yeah? 私はこう思います。私はこれがいいと思います。私はこれでやりたいと思います。That is way too much watashi for Japanese. Yeah, way too much I. In Japanese, I would focus on Handa-san, yeah, and be like, Handa-san, どうでしょうか? これでいいでしょうか? いかがでしょうか? Okay? 私は、これでいいと思いますが、いかがでしょうか? こういう提案はどうでしょうか? これでよろしいでしょうか? So I'm really focusing on her. So that switch is very, very hard to do. That's one of the reasons why code switching is really challenging because it's not the word level, it's getting down to the value level. And as you can see between English and Japanese, these are basically opposites. So it's hard for the brain to switch values so quickly. If you look at actually British English, you'll notice that there's a little bit more, it's a little bit different. So it's the analytical approach, which means, yeah, like Japan, it has a focus on the situation or the other person. Okay, so you have one point in common. So for me, living in Japan and then living in England was actually quite easy. It was easier for me to do that, but my US American friends had a lot of hard time because they're like, it's the same language, it should be the same code. I said, no, it's the same language, but it's a different code. Or it's a different communication style. And interestingly, they do speak differently. US English speakers and British English speakers speak differently. It's a different code. So when I'm speaking in US English, I'll say, yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think we should totally do that. And if I'm speaking in British English, I'll be like, really, that sounds really very interesting. And I think that's a really good option to look at. I'm going to switch over because it's a different code. So just because you have the same language does not mean you have the same code. And that's something to keep in mind. Okay. And now, so once I mentioned that, I wanted to show the difference, okay, behind that communication style or that code. Okay. Because as we start to change it, all right, we have three different levels we're looking at. Okay. On the language level, the key point between Japanese and US English is subject usage. That's where the individual versus the group focus comes in. Okay. Subjects are often very, very different. As an interpreter, this was a big, big challenge I faced going between the subjects. And the second one is the verb usage. US English really relies on these action verbs or these visual verbs to paint a picture because there are no characters, there's no kanji in English. But Japanese, because the kanji is in the nouns, yeah, the verbs are far less important. And so in Japanese, many of the verbs are often descriptive. So this would be like this, arimasu, okay? The verbs are far less important because the key information is encoded in the nouns. And in fact, many verbs are also kanji plus suru. One of my best hacks in Japanese, if I didn't know what the verb was to like katakana, a noun, and then suru. Yeah, like tennis shimasu ka? And they're shimasu ni. I'm like, yes, it works. Yeah. What it would be like, what did I would say? Like, Dina shimasu ka? Be like, shimasu ne. And I'd be like, oh, you can katakana anything. Yay. So sometimes when we don't know, I would take sort of this understanding of, okay, nouns are really important and then the verbs are less important. Yeah. So here's one switch is really sort of how the verbs and the subject switch. That's a very, very key component when going between the languages. So coding, yeah, between Japanese and US English means focusing on these two parts of the language. And then the other ones basically fall in line. We don't have to worry so much about them. And the next part is the voice shift. Okay, so here's what's really interesting about US English and Japanese. When I'm speaking in US English, especially my presentation voice, all right, my sound is coming from below the Adam's apple, which is your nodobotoke. Yeah, and so you can feel it, you can sense it, and also the Adam's apple moves down when I'm speaking in US English. As I speak in Japanese, hold on. じゃあ日本語で話す場合、喉仏の上になりますので、声が違います。しかも日本語で話す場合、喉仏が上がります、自然に。Okay, so as I'm speaking in Japanese and I get into my Japanese voice like this, the sound comes from above the Adam's apple. In addition, the Adam's apple in this part of the throat actually moves up. Yeah. And in terms of the intonation and emphasis, the coding in English is all about the key content words. I'm really emphasizing this because I'm putting my identity into these key content words via my intonation. Intonation, enunciation, articulation is identity in US English. Yeah. And in Japanese, I'm putting it in the key connector words. The key connector words could be keigo, teinego, could be the person's name, it could be the person's status. Yeah, that's where I'm putting the emphasis in Japanese. They're very, very different emphasis. And then the last part is really the face and the body shift. Okay, so in English, when I am working with Japanese speakers, I emphasize what I call bod because it's really in the body in English. So when I am speaking like this and I am presenting to people in English, I think bod, okay, which is breathe from your diaphragm, which is your okakumaku, and then you're opening your throat, and then you're dropping your jaw, basically. And the sound comes down and it goes up. So it's a very deep sound because it's coming from down in that diaphragm. You can hear it. So in English, if I really, really want to project my voice without a microphone, I completely can because I'm using a huge muscle called the diaphragm. Okay. Now, as I speak in Japanese, I have to switch it, all right, especially if I'm speaking very polite Japanese. So if I'm doing a presentation in Japanese, I have to think, I think hoppe, hana, hira, which is hoppe, hana, hira. So basically, I'm thinking cheeks, yeah, I have to smile. And then I'm thinking hana, try to breathe through my nose. And then I'm thinking sort of get this nice and flat, hiratai ni naru. Yeah, so that's cheeks, nose, and basically eyebrows. So what's happening is I'm using this. And what's really interesting, actually, if you look at emojis in Japanese, they don't have the mouth because this is what's really important in Japanese. And then if you look at emojis in English, they always feature the mouth because this is important in English. The line is here in English and the line is here in Japanese. Yeah, so I'm switching that line as well. So that when I'm speaking in English, I'm like, hello, everyone. Hi, my name is Kerianne. Then I flip. Ha, konnichiwa, minasan, Kerianne to moshimasu. And then I'm getting the accurate register in both of those. So I'm making that face and body shift. Okay. And then lastly, for my body shift, in Japanese, I'm focusing on pushing my shoulder, English, I'm pushing my shoulder blades together to give me more presence, to give me more identity. The individual is very important. When I'm speaking in Japanese, I relax. I get very bad posture actually in Japanese. I'm relaxing my chest and my arms. I'm trying to make myself smaller. This is particularly true of women speaking Japanese. Yes, if I went into Japanese being like, Shacho, konnichiwa, he'd be like, whoa, a little too much. Shacho, konnichiwa. I'm making myself smaller. I'm also, when I was first working in Japan, I happened to be taller than all of my bosses. So I had to make myself a little bit shorter than all of them. So that might have contributed to my posture as well. All right, so the key point is to have a process to do this. Okay, so the process that I use, which is easier for me and hopefully helpful to others, is this. Okay, I start with the body. So if I am speaking in English, I pop back. Yeah. I'll do English first and then I'll do Japanese. Second is I sort of open my eyes in English because it's really about the eyes. Third, I really open the throat. And the last part is I focus on the person or the individual. So I think about I. Okay. That's the process I'm doing. Now, once you practice, the first time this takes a few seconds, but once you do this for a few times, basically the goal would be to do this process within a second. That's the ultimate goal, is to code switch within 1 second. Okay. And then as I go into Japanese, I relax, I smile, I focus on my nose, and then I think about everyone. 1, 2. And that is how I switch. That is how, if you are an adult that goes back and forth between English and Japanese, if you are what I call a functional bilingual, which means someone who learned the language as an adult after the age of 15, okay? Basically, in terms of cognitive kind of development, the age of 15 to 16 is when you start to develop executive functioning, which is long-term planning and long-term visualization skills. That's when your brain starts to become an adult brain. So that's why I say about 15, 16. So if you started to learn both languages before, so I would say like elementary school up to middle school, okay, you do this automatically. You're an adaptive bilingual. But for everyone else, including myself, I am a functional bilingual. So I had to learn this step by step by step. All functional bilinguals need to learn how to code switch. They need these triggers or these prompts in order to be able to do this under a second. This is just how it works. Yeah. If not, some of it will cross over, but not everything. Yeah. So you might have like very clear English, but your voice is really small and your posture is very small and it's not going to work. Yeah. Or 日本語で話す場合はこのように話すとちょっと存在感が大きすぎますよね. It's too much in Japanese if I do this, right? So when someone is fluent in a language, the listener expects that the code should match. When the code doesn't match, it sends that foe or enemy signal. Okay. So if we are a elementary or basically intermediate speaker, okay, the other person will recognize that immediately. That's fine. Okay. But as we get to be an advanced speaker, okay, it's not about the language anymore. It's about the coding of the message. And that's where, for most of this audience, yeah, for example, who live, who speak both English and Japanese, okay, it's really about the coding. Yeah. Once you get to a certain level where you're basically can express yourself on a day-to-day basis, then the listener will expect you to understand not the language, but you understand the code, which includes the language. And that I would say would be high intermediate or above. Below that, your language is so limited that the listener understands that you are not fluent in the language and does not expect you to be able to code effectively. So the cutoff point is really high intermediate advanced. So the key point is having this process to make that quick switch. So what happens is you think, okay, 日本語。皆さんこんにちは。Kerianneと申します。よろしくお願いいたします。Hi, everyone. I'm Kerianne, and it's great to be with you today. Okay, that is the goal, to be able to do that in less than a second. That is the foundation of code switching. Now, of course, when we're looking at the language, there's more and more we can work on. This is a lifelong process. But to me, this is your foundation for code switching, is knowing what you need to switch and knowing how to switch it and be able to do it quickly. Okay, so at this point, I've been able to give you kind of an overview of how code switching works, the what, the why, and the how. And as I mentioned before, okay, here's my email. I will also put it in the chat. I'm happy to share this material with people, okay? I have many other slides that I can draw from if we have specific questions about certain topics, right? And I'm happy to share these files with anyone who wants them. For me, this is a very important topic that people don't talk about. It's not really recognized. It's not There's very little information on how to do this. I had to learn this on my own the hard way. And so I'm very passionate about sharing this and helping others to be able to do this process. So at this point, I'm going to go off stopping share. I'm going to stop my share screen. All right. And at this point, Yuko-san has some questions that she
Yes,
has,
yes.
and then we
you.
can also open it up to other questions as well.
Yes. Thank you, Kerianne. That was phenomenal. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. We already have some fabulous questions in chat, but before we delve into those chats, we discussed a little bit about how it might be helpful to share. You came from a primarily speaking English to speak in Japanese. I came from primarily, yes, I did go to an international school growing up in Japan, so I was speaking English my whole life. But I came from a fairly Japanese thought process, Japanese behavior, because my parents were Japanese and I grew up in Japan, to adjusting to the American thought process, American behavior. So I was drawing a sort of a similarity of my experience in American college, right? When I first came to the States, I spoke the language perfectly. I mean, not perfectly, but at least the way I'm speaking right now, I spoke the language the way I'm speaking right now. But when the professor would do a presentation and people were, giving hands, I was sitting there trying to figure out, okay, so person A said this, person B said this, person C said this, and I was trying to figure out the connections, right? Why did the person B say this and person A said that? And by the time I'm ready to say something, the topic is onto something completely different. So for the longest time, my professors thought that I was not interested in class. Because I spoke, the language was there. Until I told them, no, I'm from Japan. And until I realized, oh, the students are not listening to each other.
Exactly. Yes.
Opinion. So I came from the group mentality, right?
Sure.
A connection between what the professor said, what student A said, said, and C said. But in America, it was really more about expressing yourself. So you don't really, maybe I'm saying it too strongly, but you don't really care what A said or what C said. You are kind of interested in expressing what you thought, what your professor. So once I got that code, then I was able to participate, right? Then the professors could understand that, no, I am doing my readings. It's not like I didn't do my reading. So that was actually really interesting. The other thing you mentioned about, placing the other first to some extent, I think it shows in 何が食べたい? 何食べたい? What do you want? So when you ask that question in Japan, many a times you get the 何でもいいよ. I'm fine with anything. And then you say, okay, じゃあイタリアン食べよう. And you go to Italian, then you only find out that your friend wanted to eat sushi. And it's like, after a while in America, you go, darn, if you wanted to eat sushi, you just should have said sushi.
Should have told me.
So I found that too in the beginning really hard, because if somebody said, what do you want to eat? And I'd say, well, I don't care. Anything's fine. And then my friends would be like, come on, Yuko, what do you want to eat? As if I was insulting that person by not sharing. So I found what you talked about really, really interesting, but coming from the opposite end. But this actually is going to lead into the first question, which I think is a fabulous question. And it says, from what I understand so far for code switching, we need to know the cultural backgrounds of the language we are switching to. But do you think this methodology can potentially make speaker biased by traditional stereotypes of their cultures?
Yes, that's a really good point. Okay, so that's why I try not to focus on the word culture so much and focus on the cognitive part. So that was one of the issues that I actually kind of had. So when I started in this field about 15 years ago, I would read the kind of those representative like authors like Hofstede and things like that. And I was like, I don't know, something doesn't work here with me. Now, there are many people who, you know, are really think that his work is seminal, which it is. And I would say my approach is just a little bit different. So I talk about communication styles because that are better data points. So for example, I've got 5 new expats coming from Japan to work in the US, and I have interviewed all of them. Now, there are 5 different people with 3 different communication styles, but they're all Japanese. So I think the point here is that every society does have a majority communication style because you need to have the majority coalesce around one. Okay. Or else society doesn't work. So I would say in general, Japanese has that more descriptive communication style. The culture is definitely in there, but I tend to focus on the communication because that's what I'm seeing. That's what I'm actually observing. Okay. Now, is that 100% of people? Of course not, right? But it's probably from my research and from all the training that I've done, out of like maybe I've trained about, I don't know, 500 people so far. Out of those 500 people, about 325 are the descriptive style. So it tells me that's majority, but that's not everybody. So the key point is majority is like a shortcut, right? So we're using the shortcut and being open that we could be completely wrong and that it could be one of these other styles as well. So yes, in a way, I need to shortcut. We all make shortcuts. We all have bias. Bias in a good way is a shortcut, in a bad way is a stereotype. We do have bias because the brain needs shortcuts because we have an information overload all the time. So I do make a shortcut to say, maybe the person has got a like 50% chance or above of being this style. And I keep open as I get different data points of going, oh, actually it's different. Yeah. Oh, they're this style. Got it. This would be important for them. So then I sort of have that, but then I keep my kind of options open, knowing that we have like 3 other communication styles that they could be. And then I sort of course correct. So I'm less of a culture person and more of an actual communication person. And I think it makes it a little bit more valid approach because I'm actually getting these data points rather than making certain assumptions about what's in the culture. Now, does that take practice to learn? Of course, it's a skill, but it's a skill that you can certainly learn, that anyone can train in their first or second language, because I've trained 500 people to do this. So it's very possible.
And thank you for sharing that, because I think what you're reminding us is that communication is a process.
Yes.
It's not a one-time,
Right.
once and for all thing.
Yes.
We have some questions a little bit related to specifically to the business
Sure.
sort of conversation, right? And it's
Yep.
very interesting you mentioned about how, like, for instance, me too, when I used to work in corporate Japan, or actually it was more of when I used to work for an American company based in Japan, working for our clients were all major Japanese companies, talk about code switching, right? Because my colleagues are American, I'm Japanese, and our customers are Japanese. And on top of that, I was a woman, women
Sure.
what I personally noticed is when I am speaking to business people in America, just like you said, I intentionally open my chest, make myself look bigger and stronger, right? My voice goes up, confidence is sort of the thing that goes in my mind. When I'm speaking in a business setting in Japan, I intentionally make myself small,
Exactly.
Make myself look smaller. I try not to raise my voice too much. But to your point of process, I've also noticed that within the same, say, meeting, I could be code switching.
Oh yeah, sure.
Times,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
I'm talking to my American boss.
Oh yeah.
I am the big me.
Yeah.
But then when I'm talking to the Japanese customer, I go back to my small me.
Oh yeah.
And sometimes I've noticed that once people start seeing you that way, they start kind of accepting you a little bit, even if you make a mistake in the code.
Yes.
So I think is it also a not just a process, but also obviously with any relationship, a trust, right?
Yes,
Like you
very
said,
much. Yes.
it's whatever method you're using,
Mhm.
it's also a trust thing. So
Yes.
is that what I'm saying a little bit relevant or?
So one of the reasons that we have codes, right, is it's a shortcut to develop trust, basically is what it is. So we're using this kind of code to say, like, I get you, you get me, we have the same code, we're pretty similar. Okay, I feel like you're safe, right? I feel like we can talk to each other. And so as we're switching the code, right, the key point is to get the code, establish that, and say like, all right, I got you, I understand you. And like I said, right, we want to trigger that friend response, because as soon as we trigger the friend response, our brains stop looking for differences and start looking for commonalities. That's a really important point here. And so, being a female business owner going to Japan, right? So I remember going to NTT Data, going to their headquarters and meeting the head of HR. This was an intimidating person. Okay. And so I'm like, go to Japanese code, go to Japanese code. I'm like, ah, こんにちは。よろしくお願いいたします。あ、ケリアンと申します。はい、よろしくお願いいたします。あ、そうですね。これはですね、今までは、and I would just like go into my code. And then after the meeting, my colleague who introduced me to the head of HR, who knows me really well, he's like, それ何だったの? And I was like, that's code switching. He was like, ちょっとうまい、ちょっと。And I'm like, これ必要ですよ。私も、日本だと、right? I'm 女性だし、外国人だし、そういう小さな会社のなんか社長だし、もう三振です。It's like an out. Yeah, I've got like 3 strikes against me in Japan. So I'm so different in Japan. I must code in the way that the other person expects, or else they're never going to listen to me and they're never going to trust me. I'm just too different. I'm so different from what this NTT HR head has seen up until now. He's seen middle-aged Japanese men. I'm the first non-Japanese female business owner who's like 10 years plus younger than him speaking to him. This is so different, right? Like the full response, the enemy response is just going to go ding, 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 ding in his head. Yeah. I've got to do everything in my power to sort of trick or kind of damasu, yeah, to sort of trick him or trick his mind into thinking he should listen and trust me. That's
Love
really
that.
hard.
Love that.
Yeah.
And that leads to
yeah.
The question of, can we code switch in a way as women
Mhm.
to get better communication without taking away the empowerment?
Such a good question. So, all right. So the sort of full-on code switching I'm doing for the really, really like sort of senior people in Japan. All right. I always do that at the beginning. Okay. Because the point is I want them to listen to me. So I think of that as a means to an end. Okay. 何か得るための手段. Okay. Sorry, this is not my identity. All right. I'm not like, hi, I'm Kerianne. No, that's not who I am. All right. But that's who I need to be to the other person temporarily. Okay. Then what I do, okay, is I use one of the styles here that's common to European English, which is the more analytical style. Okay. That style is not about the other person and it's not about me, it's about the situation. So what I do is I switch in a way that changes my subjects to neutral subjects. And this allows me to be about the work. It allows me to be about the task. It allows me to be about my expertise, not about me as a female. And I use this both in Japanese and English because I work with a lot of men, a lot of senior men. I started out my career in the United States in baseball. This is a very man-centric field. There was like one other woman who was with me in spring training, one, and she was a nutritionist. I was the only other female who worked with the players. And I remember this coach saying like, do you want to watch soap operas? And I was like, seriously, are we back in like the 1960s? And I'd be like, sorry, don't let the dress fool you. Like I'm out with the work. So what I do in Japanese and English is in Japanese, I go, これはですね。はい、これに関してはこれが大事です。で、これに関してはこれは大切にこう考えた方がいいですね。I'm really making the subject about this or there is or this is. I'm not making it about me and I'm not making it about the other person. I'm removing the hierarchy from the situation. That's how I know to achieve a more empowered phrasing and a more empowered explanation in Japanese, but likewise, you can do this in English too. Yeah, instead of saying, I think this is important, this is really important, this is the reason why, and this is what should happen. You can completely use the same technique in both languages, and you become that go-to person, you become that expert. I think that's, for me, that's quite an empowered state of mind.
And I've also, if I may add,
Sure.
noticed that, there's code switching that happens between two languages and two cultures.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually code switching that happens in being a woman, or being a woman. Actually, we're code switching constantly, right? Like,
sure. Yeah.
the mother is very different from me as a working woman, and very different from me as a wife. I'm sure it happens to male too. You
For sure.
as a father is very different from you as a friend, as a
Mm-hmm.
husband.
Sure. Sure.
Code switching. I think it also happens across profession, right? Like,
Yes.
doctors have a certain code.
Yes, very much so.
Certain code.
Mm-hmm.
Mechanics have a certain
Yep.
code. Baseball
Yeah.
players have a certain
Yep.
code. So I don't think it's necessarily just different languages and
Exactly.
different.
Yes. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if I may share a little bit, because I also do business or talk business between businessmen and women in Japan, and businessmen and women in America. I think it's more of I don't think I necessarily change who I am,
Mm-hmm.
or how assertive I am,
Mm-hmm.
but I package it differently.
Sure. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that does not mean putting myself lower.
No.
Not mean making myself less important in
No,
Japan.
not at all.
I'm just packaging it differently.
Yes.
I think to your point of, because you want to gain trust.
Yes.
And
Yes.
same with America. And sometimes I have to package myself differently, to the extent that it is a little bit tiring, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I always have to make myself
Sure.
confident, but it's you've got to do what you need to do to gain the trust. So rather than to think of it as feminism/sexism, I think it's easier to think about it more so in a packaging it differently.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Like I said before, it's a means to an end. So one idea about code switching is about community. And so people travel in different communities. So, on the weekend, I am on mom duty. Yeah. And I am, doing different things as a mom. Would I talk to my son like I talk to my clients? No, that would be a little bit, sometimes I do by accident. And, he repeats it back to me and I'm like, oh, that's what I sound like when I'm, in my sort of business code, right? So we all switch because we all want to feel part of community. And so each community has a code, right? And so as I'm going from mom community, that's one code, to maybe business community, that's a different code. We're always, like I said at the beginning, that's the beauty of the human brain, is that capacity for flexibility and that capacity to shift. I think it's amazing. It's just this wonderful, amazing world where, we can do all of these things in a moment and not realize just how amazing it is. So, yesterday I was trying to talk to a group of people in Japanese, and then my son is next to me, and I'm like, so desu ne, kore ga ii to omoimasu. And my son is like, hey, mama, I want to watch this. I'm like, hold on one second, just give me, and I'm like switching back and forth between sort of business mode in Japanese and then mom mode in English. And then I got caught in between. I was like, injanai, Daniel Tiger. And I was like, wait, sorry. Okay. So they don't, so like you can get caught in the moment between it. And I was like, my son looks at me, he goes, huh? I'm like, oh, I got stuck between them. I think it's amazing how the brain has that capacity to switch on these multiple levels almost instantaneously to make sure, right, we're building that sense of community between people. Yeah. So it's not necessarily identity. It's maybe a part of us. Yeah. So we're kind of using this part more in English, this part more in Japanese, this part more with friends, this part more with business. The fact is we are an amalgamation, or the sort of combination of all these parts. And each code is almost like a different part of us. So it's not our identity, but it's maybe a part of a much larger overall identity. And I think it's interesting to explore that and think about that.
I think you partially answered the next question,
Okay,
but I'm still going to
sure.
ask you anyway. So we have a question that says, I think having diversity within the team is crucial to make innovation happen.
Mhm.
But how do you deal with a diverse team where
Mhm.
there's so many codes
Yep.
that's happening? You know, do you have any advice
Yeah,
for
that's
that?
such a good question. So I've got a team right now that we're in that situation. Okay. So I think it's important for them, whoever that lead is, needs to sort of set the code. Okay. So I've got one team where we've got 6 people, I think, altogether. And we've got someone who has like a background from Iran and the UK, someone from Russia, someone from France, someone from Japan, and someone from the US. It's crazy with all the different codes there, right? Different ages, different genders. Okay. So what we decided was that ultimately we're in the US. Yeah. So each person gets to think in whichever code they want. But as we come together, yeah, when we are doing decision-making meetings, we focus on more US English code and what that means, which is decision basis, action oriented, get to the goal, think strategically. And so as people are brainstorming and expanding, we allow those codes to sort of intermingle. But then the facilitator needs to say, okay, now we're going to switch over and now we're going to make a decision. And so we're going to kind of switch over into US business mode right now. And so you kind of allow it for a certain amount of time. And then you have to go, okay, we need to settle on this one style and focus on, let's say, US English, because we are in the United States. So that's what I've done in the past. So it really depends on the goal of the communication at the time. So it's a little bit, I would say, case by case, case by case situation.
I'd like to also ask you a question about we've been focusing a lot, I think a little bit on getting your thought through or
Yep.
communicating. And there's a great question about is there a special code to use when you're disagreeing with someone's idea?
Yes, yes. So that's a really important part because the way that cultures disagree is very much about the value system. So when I work with my, for example, clients originally from Japan who come to the US, now if they're managers and they're working with a team, they want to say like, no, right? Because in Japanese, as the joshi, as the boss, you can be like, yeah, chigaimasu. それは違います. You can say this in Japanese and it's fine. Okay. Now, if you try to say this in the US, your staff is going to be like, what? Yeah, okay. Because you're disagreeing with the person, not the idea. And in English, you need to disagree with the idea, not the person, right? So in English, it's like, I see what you're saying, but, right? So we need to have a code to disagree based on the value system. So I would say that I call it like validate, yeah, and then provide the reason and then provide the alternative. So when we talk about the difficult coding aspects, I have these kind of processes that I use with my clients to say, okay, a disagreeing process is step 1, validate. Step 2, provide the reason. Step 3, provide the alternative. And that really helps people understand that those difficult parts where the codes are different, we need to have these different processes because you have to learn them if you are functional bilingual. Yeah, as an adult, you have to learn these differences. Now, in Japanese, like you can't be like, その何さんの考えはすごくわかりますが、私の考えはこうです. It's just weird in Japanese. Like I wouldn't say this. But one of my favorite sentences in Japanese is おっしゃる通りですか? And I'm like, wait a minute. That does my English logic brain is like, you can't say おっしゃる通りですか? It's like either you agree 100% or you disagree. This like I'm agreeing but also disagreeing at the same time, I find really fascinating. It's kind of like the yes but of English, which you can't do either. So you certainly have these codes. In Japanese, the code has to be really nuanced when you disagree because the way you say it doesn't matter. Your own individual thought process matters less in Japanese and the other person's position matters more, right? So if I disagree with an intern in Japanese, I can be like, yeah, それは違いますよ. Okay. can I say this to someone who's like the CEO of a company? Oh, no way. Yeah. Be like, I can't say to like, "社長違いますよ." He'd be like, get out of here right now. I can't say that. I'd be like,そうですか。そうです。なるほど. I just have to just like string it out as long as I can in Japanese, and maybe he'll get the points, but there's no way I could say that. So in English, it's really important to kind of validate the person as two separate people who need to respect each person's ideas, but then you can completely have your own alternative idea. In Japanese, you need to understand the code of the status and really respect that status. And that's far more important. So yeah, there's definitely different coding systems for disagreement. And that is one of the areas where the culture makes a bigger difference. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Kerianne, fascinating, wonderful topic. I know everybody wants to hear more, and we haven't answered all of the questions either, but I am going to be the evil woman to say we are at the end of our program tonight. Kerianne, do you mind actually sharing your email address again in chat?
No problem. No problem.
Those of us who want her presentation, you have her, or if you're more interested in her consulting service, you never know, you have her email address. Also, for anyone who for some reason or any reason forget her email address, you can always reach us at info@japansocietyboston.org, and we will happily forward the presentation to you that way as well. As my parting sort of gift to all of you, as somebody who have spent my whole life probably code switching, to some extent, strange Japanese parents who sent me to an international school since I was in kindergarten. And for somebody who have gone through a nice portion of my early 20s being very confused about my identity, I will say that in the end, I came out saying, this is just great, isn't it? Because I can be quote unquote American woman when I want to be, and a Japanese woman when I want to be. I just need to make sure that I don't move my hands too much when I speak in Japanese.
Yeah, that makes a difference. Yeah.
And then how exciting to confuse people too. I mean, I don't do it maliciously, but it sometimes comes out and it's confuses people, and that's okay too. But I think what Kerianne has really helped us tonight is really, I think, the most important thing that we can take home with us is flexibility and open-mindedness, right?
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
When you have that, it's, as Kerianne said, our brain is just really fascinating. It's if you can look at it more so from that perspective of, look at what my brain is doing.
Exactly.
I think then it becomes a fun process versus, oh my God.
Exactly. Yes.
Go ahead, Kerianne.
Yes, to that point, sort of, there's a phrase in Japanese like the beginner's mind, which I think is a beautiful phrase, right? And so, if going back and forth between languages and between codes, as Yuko said, it's tiring. Yeah, it takes about 25% more energy to speak a second language. Okay. And on a day-to-day basis, you're like, yeah, I'm like, oh, am I getting frustrated? It happens to all of us, even if we're bilingual speakers. But to me, it's really fascinating to watch this whole process, because I'm like, I started with nothing, right? I did, like, when I was 18, I had not one word of Japanese, maybe Mitsubishi, maybe like, I know like a couple from TV. But I really didn't know very much at all. And then over time, my brain created this foundation for this, new language, and then added on the cognitive piece, the thought process. Then it went to the value system. And then I lived in Japan so long that I started to forget English. I thought this was amazing. I had to come back to the States because I forgot how to like have a coherent sentence in English after a while, because I spoke Japanese at home with my partner. I spoke Japanese at work all the time, and I was interpreting, so it wasn't my words. And I thought, this is fascinating that I can go to the point where almost like my first and second language switch. That's like the most major code switch you can happen in your life. And you're like, yeah, なんか英語が出てこない. Like, I don't I can't remember what the word was in English. And I'd be like, what is the word for the thing that you put your hand on when you walk down the stairs? And my mom was like, banister? Yes, banister. That's what it was, you know? And it would be so funny because I'd be like, are, nadakke, like I would know it in Japanese, but not know it in English. And I thought it's so fascinating that my brain has decided that this is not useful in English, but it's more useful in Japanese. And isn't it amazing that our brains have made that decision for us and have decided that's what's more important for us to sort of survive and thrive in an environment? And, you know, for my part, it was relatively easy, but it was such a struggle for so many people. And, you know, in Japan, I think you have a lot more support system because many people are like, yeah, Japanese is so hard. It's really hard. Japan is really difficult. And there's sort of the understanding like, yeah, you're going to need some support and some help. But US being a country of immigrants, or at least the story of the US as a country of immigrants, there's very little support system. And I was like, my God, this is so hard. And I started working with a certain company where I think 1/3, if not more, of their staff level, yeah, were Chinese speakers. And yet management was only 3%. And I was like, no, 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 no. This is not diversity. This is not, no, no, no. And I was like, the hurdle in the US is not working in English. It's not working in a second language. It's managing and leading. And that's about the code, because there are multiple codes available for the working level, the staff level. But there was really one key code for management and leadership level. And if you didn't speak that code, you weren't invited into the group. And I was like, that's something that's stopping many of my clients, right, who are either bilingual speakers or English is their second language. They don't know the codes. Not that it's not an English issue. This is a coding issue. So I started to train people and companies and teams on how to do this. And I was like, I want to give you that insider information. I want you to know the code, because if the US calls itself a diverse country, it really should put its money where its mouth is, right? It really should actually be that. And to me, creating this skill set for this group of bilingual speakers and the second language speakers are an amazing asset to a company. And so they should really be, right, also represented in leadership, because as we know from the research, if you have sort of the same sort of level of diversity in the leadership and the staff level, the company actually performs better. And so for my part, I unfortunately kind of came up against that wall in Japan of being different. And I went as far as I could go. And I thought, well, the wall is not supposed to be as high in the US. So maybe I can be part of that sort of like knows the, like kind of understands what the rope looks like and gives people the rope so that they can climb over that wall themselves. And so I'm continuing to work with people and meet people and do things like I'm happy to provide people with the slides, you know, with the PDF. I'm very open source about my material because I am, I think at my heart, a scientist, and secondly, a business person. So, you know, I want to share this information. I want to make sure we can build this generation or this group of people who can do the code switching, who can act as sort of the bridges between these between different cultures and different languages, whatever they may be. So that's my kind of probably lifelong passion at this point. And I'm really thankful to you, Yuko, and to everyone who gave me the kind of opportunity to sort of share this information. I'm happy to follow up if you have questions or, you know, other areas that you'd like to know more about. Just send me a quick email. Okay. I try to respond as fast as I can, but sometimes, yeah, I ask for your patience if I get a lot of emails, and just, you know, keep as much as you can, keep this in mind and try to kind of keep, as Yuko said, like it's all about that flexibility and open-mindedness and that ability to switch and change and kind of adjust to these different communities, adjust to these different environments. That's the beauty of being human. It's the beauty of the world that we live in now. So please get in touch if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer more. This is something I care deeply about. So I'm happy to be of help and of service to everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kerianne. And not to forget that this is a process. So we're not going to get it right. Kerianne's going to, make mistakes. I'm going to make mistakes. We're all going to make mistakes. It's a process. And lastly, a little self-plug for Kerianne and for JSB. Kerianne is starting the YouTube channel, right?
Yes.
It's going to be up and running in a couple of weeks.
Yes.
Or learning lab. So once that up, we will absolutely make sure that we share that on our JSB site. So and newsletters. So if you're not reading our newsletters diligently, please do so. We have a lot of really fascinating events actually coming up in May and June. And as a matter of fact, newsletter is going out tomorrow, so please read it from top to bottom. Requirement, everyone. But anyhow, thank you very much for joining us. Kerianne is wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I can say wonderful 100 times. She is also a mom and a working person. So like she said, please be patient if you don't hear back from her. And we are always, always a resource as well at the Japan Society of Boston. So we're here for you. As I always say, we are a community of bridge builders. This was a wonderful program, Kerianne, and I'm sure this will not be the first. I mean, the last that we do a program with you. So with that said, thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful one, and see you soon in our next event.
Thank you. ご清聴ありがとうございました。Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.
Thank you very much. ありがとうございました。